recording in progress.
Hello, my name is Mary Beth Hines. I'm excited to be the host of Keys for SLPs, Learning from Legends in honor of ASHA's 100th anniversary. Today, I'm joined by a co-host for this episode, Margo Kinzer Courter, ASHA Board Certified Child Language Specialist and presenter for Speech Therapy PD. Before we begin, a reminder that this episode is available for 0.1 ASHA CEUs. If you are joining us on a podcast platform and would like to earn ASHA CEUs, please complete all course modules on this episode of your Speech Therapy PD account. And here are the disclosures. Mary Beth Hines, the host of Keys for SLP's podcast, receives compensation from Speech Therapy PD. Margo Kinzer Courter has authored the See It and Say It Visual Phonics program. She receives compensation from Speech Therapy PD for co-hosting this podcast episode. Both Dr. Westby and Dr. Kamhi have no disclosures to share.
Thank you, Mary Beth. A little technical difficulty on my side, but I am back. I have the pleasure of introducing our speakers today, and it is quite a thrill to be able to do this. So first, I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Carol Westby. She's a consultant for bilingual multicultural services in Albuquerque, New Mexico. She holds an affiliated appointment in communication disorders at Brigham Young University. She is a fellow of the American Speech Language Hearing Association, has received honors of the association and the Kleffner Lifetime Clinical Achievement Award. She also holds board certification in child language and language disorders. Dr. Westby has received the Distinguished Alumnus Award from Geneva College and the University of Iowa's Department of Speech Pathology and Audiology. She's received the H-ASHA Award for contributions to multicultural affairs. She has published and presented nationally and internationally on theory of mind, narrative, expository development and facilitation, adverse childhood experiences, trauma, qualitative methodologies, assessment and facilitation of written language, metacognition, executive function, and attention deficit hyperactivity disorders, and issues in assessment and intervention with culturally, linguistically diverse populations. Dr. Westby has a BA in English from Geneva College and an MA and PhD in speech pathology from the University of Iowa. Welcome, Dr. Westby. It is also my pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Alan Kamhi.
Kamhi.
What's that, please?
Kamhi.
Kamhi. Thank you, Dr. Kamhi. He is the professor of communication science and disorders at UNC Greensboro. He's published widely in areas of speech, language, and reading. Recent books include Language and Reading Disabilities with Hugh Katz. He received honors of the Association for ASHA from ASHA in 2014 and is an ASHA Fellow. Welcome, Dr. Westby and Dr. Kamhi.
We are so excited to get to know you both. You are both true legends in our field, and we are honored to have you with us today. So before we dig in, we thought it would be fun to learn something fun about you. So can you tell us a little something about yourself that people may not know? Dr. Westby, would you like to go first?
Well, I think a number of people know this, and Alan knows this. I've always loved ducks. So over 25 years, I had pet ducks. And Alan's girls, because of that, made him buy his girls a duck. So we share duck love together. And my email is Mocha because that was the name of the duck I had when email first became out.
That's so fun.
Yeah. The other thing, I always wanted to be an astronaut. So as in elementary school, I watched Captain Video and the Video Rangers, and I daily watched the reruns of Star Trek.
Love it. Well, thank you for sharing that. You are an explorer, even though you're not an astronaut. And how about Dr. Kamhi? How about you?
Well, I guess I'll just follow up on the duck story. So my kids always wanted a pet, and I don't like pets, don't like dogs, don't like cats, and was able to put off getting a pet because I did a sabbatical in Arizona in 1993. So for the year before that, my kids were 12-ish, 7-ish. It's like, no, we can't get a pet because we're going to be leaving Memphis, going to Arizona. So as Carol knows, Memphis is on Interstate 40. I'm on Interstate 40 in North Carolina. And as we're driving back to Memphis, we're around Albuquerque, where Carol lives. And my kids are like, remember, Dad, you said we could get a pet when we we're going back to Memphis. So we're in Albuquerque, I think of Carol. So I just say we're going to get ducks, not thinking it's going to happen. The mistake I made was, and I don't know if Carol knows this story, was I mentioned it to one of my colleagues back in Memphis, Sally Hillard, who had the office next to me, if you remember Sally. She unfortunately passed away relatively young. And Sally said, oh, you could get ducks at Love's Feed. It's like, what? You could actually get them? And my wife goes to Love's Feed, and we ended up with 2 ducks, Daisy and Waddles. And so I guess the other thing about the duck story, Perry Flynn is one of my colleagues. If you know Perry,
yes, yeah.
Perry's the president-elect of ASHA, and Perry, I've been at UNCG for 20 years, and Perry knows I don't like pets, but I told the duck story once, and Perry loves the duck story, and I have a picture of the duck in my office. Waddles actually got bit by a raccoon, so it had to become an indoor duck. I think Carol visited when it was.
Oh my goodness.
So we'll just leave it at the duck story.
And yes, we have had the privilege of having Perry on this podcast twice.
Have
We're
you?
hoping to get him one more time. So, yeah, we're excited that he's president-elect. So very fun. Well, thank you for sharing those tidbits. And now, Margo, you want to dive into child language?
I never thought we would start with ducks today, so that's a beautiful way to start. All right, Dr. Kamhi, we'll start with you. Can you share about your journey, what led you to speech pathology, your early career, and why you chose the area of interest that you did?
Okay, so two stories. So the one story I tell about why I entered the field, I tell this to most people. And that is after getting my undergraduate degree in psychology, sociology at Wisconsin, I took a course in almost every department except speech. And my undergraduate was about ruling out what I wanted to do. So I wanted to put off what to do. So I joined the Peace Corps. And I was in Tunisia teaching English as a third language. And I had a number of kids, adolescents who stuttered. So the story I tell most people is Tunisia at the time, 1972, I don't know if it does now, didn't have a speech pathologist. And I felt for these kids, and that was the reason I went into speech path. My other thinking was I wanted a 9-to-5 job. So I had it between optometry and speech. So that's the story I tell most people. But if you know me, the real reason is I'm a stutterer. So the real reason I went into the field was I wanted to figure out what the hell was going on with my speech. And I've written a couple of articles in stuttering. And when I got to Indiana, my interest was stuttering. They put me in therapy right away. My issue was I didn't stutter when I taught. So people really didn't know I was a stutterer, but I thought I would go into stuttering. But I won't share names, but the faculty member at Indiana was not a researcher. So I had a colleague, an audiology colleague, not colleague, wasn't a colleague then, he was a professor. And he said, Alan, if you want to get your degree, I was going to do a thesis in stuttering, you can't work with this individual. And I'd taken a course in language acquisition from Rita Naramore, the head of the department, and I just loved language acquisition. And this faculty member, Nick Hipskin, basically said, if you want to get a degree, work with Rita. So that got me in child language, working with Rita. But I never lost the interest in stuttering. Actually, the last paper I will probably write as a single author just came out in the quarterly journal. What's the journal? The Quarterly Journal of Communication Disorders, and it's a 40-year reflection. So I wrote a couple of papers in stuttering in 1982, and I just wrote a 40-year reflection on some of the things I said 40 years ago. So that's the history of, and then, well, I'll let Carol talk.
Okay. Yeah, we've got another connection here. I had no idea that I'd end up a speech language pathologist. As I said, I really wanted to be an astronaut. Long story of how in undergrad I figured I was majoring in chemistry, and then the literature classes were interesting. And this was becoming a speech language pathologist was a case of what Jaworski in his book on leadership calls synchronous miracles. Things come together in a way that you didn't anticipate, but you're kind of in the right place with the right skills at the right time. So I was in chemistry and some literature classes. The dean of women at the college was an SLP. There was no SLP program, but she started teaching some relevant classes. So I took them, and they were kind of a cross between chemistry and literature. So that seemed pretty interesting. So I took the classes she offered, and then she said, you should go to grad school. And again, I didn't really know about I'm the only one in my generation that has a college degree. My mother had a third grade education, but she was always very supportive of what I did, but I didn't know how you did these kinds of things. So she said, apply. And she said, apply to the University of Kansas and the University of Iowa. So I did the both. And one of my classmates had job in the school system in Iowa, so we went out together. So my thesis and dissertation were in stuttering, and my first
Really
publication was in stuttering.
interesting.
Graduated, went to Troy, Albany area of New York, got a position in what was then the ARC's, Association for Retarded Citizens. That was before there were special education laws. And in grad school, I had been active in community action programs. So I went looking for a volunteer program, went to an inner city program and said, oh, I'm here to volunteer. And I happen to be an SLP. And the Catholic sister in charge looks at me and says, that's exactly what I've been praying for. Come next door. So she takes me next door, and this is real inner city kind of look in terms of the buildings, the tenements. And there's a little 6-year-old African-American boy. She says, I can't understand a word he says. And she was right. You couldn't understand him. And I said, well, could he hear? She said, I don't know. And I said, well, we need to test his hearing. The convent has an old audiometer. Now, why the convent would have an audiometer, I don't know, but they did. We tested his hearing. He clearly had a hearing loss. She got him hearing aids. She roamed around Troy and Albany, finding the kids she couldn't understand and bring them to me. That's how I ended up in child language, multicultural issues, learning about African-American English, and ended up never doing anything more than stuttering.
Marvelous. So what was your a thesis in, as I stuttered?
Oh, the dissertation was looking at language skills of 5 and 6-year-old kids who stuttered. It was, I think, maybe the first study looking at language.
Well, it had to be the first because Nan, did that. Bernstein Ratner, that was her area. So you were the first. So I was the first who did Can Stutterers Talk and Chew Gum at the same time. I had this thing that it was an attention issue, that stutterers focus too much on speech, and if you could distract them, and that's one of the reflections, because nobody looked at the relationship of attention to stuttering back then. Anyway, that's cool. So I guess we have to talk about child language now, right, guys?
Yeah.
That's a pretty good segue right back to me, Dr. Kamhi. So let's dive into child language. So let's start with Dr. Kamhi. How has the treatment and evaluation of language disorders evolved through the years, and especially throughout your career?
Okay, so, when you've been in the field for a number of years, you kind of go back to the beginning. So I was a master's student at Indiana University, 1974 to 1976. And the first year, did Dave Vertusnik come? I think he came the first or second year as a master's student. And Dave Vertusnik came from Northwestern, where Laura Lee developed the DSS. So one of the first language analyses focused on syntax. She also had a therapy approach. We would create stories. So it was kind of a little discourse. So you'd have to write stories. So the focus was on syntax and morphology. Liz Bates in 1976 published her dissertation as a book, Language in Context. Westby Knows the Story, Carol Prudding, Judy Johnston, my mentor, who ended up working with Liz. So the field transitioned to pragmatics, if you will, from syntax morphology to pragmatics.
Yeah.
So I guess I should, how about if I just stop there? Well, let me just finish reading. So, how did I get into reading? So I had kids in therapy, school-age kids. We actually had a classroom teacher in Indiana. So we had a real good program for young kids. And I'd work with 4, 5, 6-year-olds with language disorders and wondered what happened to them when they got to school. Basically, did these kids, after they're producing their grammatical morphemes and their syntax, what happened to them? And that's what led me into reading, if you will. We would just pass them on. Did these kids have reading disabilities? And as we know, in the 80s and 90s, so Jerry Wallach, Kay Butler were the first to really get into it, and me and Hugh, and we did the dog and pony shows, convincing the field that, we need to be involved in reading. And I think I'll stop there.
Yeah, yeah. You're right. Yeah, I know kind of that same sequence and went through it in my mind. The one thing I'd also add, in addition to pragmatics, was moving into the discourse and the depth of narrative study
Right.
that occurred just right around or shortly after the emergence of pragmatics. And certainly I've looked at a lot at narrative, and I'm continuing to do that.
And Carol, the first paper on narratives was by who? Judy Johnston, 1982, my mentor. Remember that? It was the first paper on narrative. Yeah, LSHSS.
And then I'm trying to think what year. It wasn't long after, because Kay Butler then asked me to edit an issue of TLD on narrative, and that was done in the 80s.
In the 80s later.
Yeah. So there was that. So I thought of all of those things. The other thing I'm thinking try to push is the movement away from a medical or educational model to the World Health Organization's International Classification of Functioning, which is really that biopsychosocial model, and getting people to look more broadly. I still find too many people who in their therapy are going to drill the kids on syntax and morphology and then know the parts of the story, but don't think about how do you make sure language is functional. What are personal environmental factors that contribute to the child's participation? Evaluate children's communication in naturalistic context and be sure that you're developing those skills. So I see people moving that way, not as fast as I would like them. ASHA took the ICF in 2001. That was 24 years ago. And I still find so many people that have never heard of it.
So just to kind of piggyback on that. So Perry teaches a number of my classes in the school age class, and he always talks about collaboration in 2024-25. But as Carol and I know, one of the first LSHS forums I did was with Linda Miller in 1988 on collaboration. So the discussion is, why are we still talking about it 35 years later? What's the deal?
Yeah.
So it just hasn't, you have push-in with some clinicians. My big thing at UNCG is our students, when they do their school practicum, have to be with a school-based clinician who is pushing in the classroom. If they don't have that as a model, even though Perry and I could talk about it in class, it just ain't going to happen. It's not going to happen. So sometimes, when Carol and I reflect, we're like, well, we were talking about that back then, and how much has changed?
Yeah.
As much as things have changed, sometimes they haven't, but that makes sense, to be very intentional about the mentors. Because it's very hard to push in if you've never seen it in practice.
Yeah.
All right. Well, you have both touched on different research, and it's hard to look back on an entire career and pick just one or two bodies of research that you feel are pivotal in this area. But if that is not too much of an ask, could you do so? Could you share with us some pivotal research that you think has really impacted the area of child language?
How about if we switch? How about we alternate who goes first? So
all right, Dr. Westby.
Well, in a way, Ellen's already summarized that, because Chomsky suggesting there was a language acquisition device got people thinking, okay, just what are kids doing early on? And as a graduate student, the person that taught my language disordered class had mimeographs of Roger Brown's data before he published the book. So we spent time in that class learning to do the analysis of the morphology and syntax several years before the book was published. So that was the beginning. We're kind of looking at what's the grammar piece. And
And
then
Carol, something that's funny, some of our listeners won't even know what a mimeograph is. I bet you some are like looking it up, like, is that some type of research tool I'm supposed to know about? That's a
no,
copy.
so that was even way before Xerox machines. Yes. So yeah, we knew Adam, Eve, and Sarah very well. Point. Uh, and then Bruner came out with LAS, language acquisition support system. And that was what then really pushed us into the pragmatics, because the focus had just been looking at the kids' production and just pretty much at a grammar level. And then Bruner's idea with LAS, then it shifted us into the pragmatics. And then several people over a couple years period of time, the narrative started in the late 60s with Labov getting stories from African-American teenagers. And he was kind of one of the first. And then 78, Appleby, his dissertation, he had looked at the stories that children tell, and he came up with a framework of looking at the structure in terms of temporal and causal organization. And it was I used to always roam the university bookstore between semesters, and this must have been, maybe it was 78, 79. I found that little book, picked it up, and said, oh, this is interesting. Had never thought about that. Then I took a course in children's literature. That all got me into then looking at narratives. And in 79, Stein and Glenn published their article on story grammar. And those kind of three people were really pivotal in getting us looking at narrative structure. And we're continuing to look in depth at those discourse level skills that get so tied in. What do kids need in order to comprehend the narratives they're reading? And I know Alan has done so much. The forum you did on reading comprehension, it's all language. That's the other thing, getting people to realize that what we do is language. That as much as we keep saying that, people still don't know that. And then the other big shift was also Labov and Warfram's work on African-American English, where people finally realized people were looking at that as just being not good at English. And then to finally have researchers say, this is a language system. And so when I think back, I think that really revolutionized, certainly in our field, the value of understanding cultural linguistic diversity.
Around what year was that?
Oh, well, the Labov stuff again started in the 60s.
60s.
Yeah, started in the 60s. Again, it took a little while to get to us. And when was Wolfram's coming out?
Wolfram a little bit later.
A little bit later.
Just again, a little tidbit. So I said I took language acquisition with Rita Naramore, similar to Carol. She didn't have the Roger Brown book, but she had like galleys in 1975. But the other course that Rita taught, Race, Culture, and Social Status at Indiana University in 1975. So a lot of people don't know that Rita did the appendix for Williams, one of the first books on poverty that came out. So we had a course in Indiana in 1975 called Race, Culture, and Social Status. And is that amazing?
That is amazing.
Okay, so if we talk
was Orlando from Indiana University too? Where did Orlando?
Taylor, yeah.
Taylor, yes.
Right, and Orlando did the preface to one of the first books Karen Pollock, Joyce Harris, and I did when we had the 7-8 years of the grants.
Right, and that was kind of one of the ways we got together, because we both had multicultural grants that brought us together.
So when I get asked a question about what pivotal research, I want to put should impact the treatment and assessment rather than has. And I'll just start with, when I think of research, I think of what causes DLD. So I'll talk about DLD later, developmental language disorder, rather than SLI, but the general topic is language disorders. And Larry Leonard, Jim Montgomery, Julie Evans, a number of years ago, did I want to say a landmark study, I think, with the Iowa data, and they found that speed of processing and working memory contribute most of the variance in developmental language disorders. So does that directly impact assessment intervention? Well, when I ask my students, it's like, what do parents care about? What's the one question parents are going to ask? Why does my kid have a language problem, right? And I've written about APD. APD gives a good answer because they have trouble processing auditory information, right? You answer the question with the name of the disorder. And what I tell the students is your first reaction is to say, oh, they don't know, meaning the field doesn't know. And I said, but how is a parent going to think of you as a professional if you say they don't know? Well, we do know. And I want you to blow them away with terms like speed of processing, working memory, that is, tell them the research, come across as knowing what causes a language disorder. And later on, I'll kind of argue that I don't want simple solutions to what causes a language disorder. Do they have direct therapy implications? Are you going to talk slower? Well, they might have, right? Because you're going to be repetitive and stuff like that. You're going to reduce the memory demands. So that's my first research one. I'm on Spell Talk, as I'm sure Carol is. Today, one of the articles that Jan sent us was a study done in Sweden. Dynamic assessment has been around for years. We used to call it, what was the gap, the proximal development, with who's going to call it, that turned into dynamic assessment. You help the kid, blah, blah, blah. Sandy Lang Gillam and I wrote a paper on that 20 years ago. Other people have. So the Swedish study looked at what? SLPs, are they doing it? Of course not. Not in their standard assessments. Should they do it? Of course they should. They should be looking at dynamic assessment because Carol and I are very interested in minorities, whatever. Dynamic assessment tells you which kids benefit from help, which kids might have, a true language disorder rather than something that's, caused by the environment. So that's an example of, we know that dynamic assessment should be used. It's not used. So one more thing. So I'm about to start teaching this fall, and I teach a graduate level course in the fall in language learning disabilities, where I cover the reading and language. My spring course is every other disorder, okay? But my first two classes, what do I talk about? I talk about teaching and learning. So I want my students to understand, even though we don't like being referred to as speech teachers, that they are teaching language. And I want them to have a theory of learning. Okay, if Carol, you probably looked at Natalie Wexter's most recent book, The Science of Learning. Well, that's old stuff, the science of learning. In the clinical forum I did 10 years ago with other people, we talked about the desirable difficulties. So we know about learning. Things like retrieval practice facilitates learning. Interleave, not your cramming, okay? So students are used to cramming the night before. That's the worst way to learn, but you have to have a definition of learning. So one of the definitions I like is Bjork's, that you differentiate between performance, which is the short-term context-dependent learning that students do when they take their midterms and they can't remember anything, 4 weeks later. But then you define learning as the context independent, the one that lasts. So I try to give them a theory of learning, if you will. And in therapy, what's going to often be, it's going to be performance. We just want the kids to perform to show that they learned it. The term we use is generalization. So I have a whole thing where, it's not a generalization problem. It's a learning problem. They haven't learned. They're just performing. So that to me is so crucial for clinicians, for anybody who is teaching, to understand how people learn, how kids learn. So that's kind of my third, applying research to assessment, and it's more for intervention than assessment. If I do assessment, so I'll just tout Carol here. I have trouble finding the article you wrote for LSHSS, but I've never forgotten it, where you wrote a paper on what a diagnostic should look like. It should be a narrative of the student, of the child's ability. It shouldn't be these, tests, the pass, the fail. I have trouble finding the paper, but it never took off. And I don't know if you want to comment on that article you wrote, if you remember it. Remember
I'm
that?
not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure which.
It's the one where you talked about, the way I characterize it is you wanted to tell a story about the client. You didn't want the usual clinic report.
That might have been tied in, because the other thing that happened when I got to New Mexico, again, it was originally from Pennsylvania, trained in Iowa. I had inner city experience, but you come to New Mexico and it's 70% non-Northern European. And the first number of years I was here, we ran all over the state doing assessments. Most of the kids I was seeing were Spanish and indigenous. All the stuff I learned seemed you need to kind of throw it out the window, and I needed to learn something more. So that's how I ended up in a lot of anthropology and linguistics classes, and took a series of courses that have so influenced how I do assessments. It was on qualitative methodology. And the woman teaching it had been a doctoral student of Edward T. Hall. He was kind of one of the early anthropologists in the US. He wrote The Silent Language in 1959, which again was it's kind of a layman's book in a way, helping people understand how culture influences everything we do. And Hall hung out much of his life in New Mexico. And so she had been his doctoral student. And that year I was helping out, working in a school in our South Valley, largely Hispanic, could not figure out what's going on with these kids. We had 2 classrooms of special ed kids. And so I took this class, and you had to have a project. And she taught us initially ethnographic interviewing. And so I interviewed the teacher, the SLP, and that was and maybe it was part of that, because we were figuring out what was going on with these kids and what were the teachers trying to do. And it turned out the teacher was really good. She just didn't know explicitly what she was doing. But when we figured out how to interview her, that was where the article on high and low context came. That might have been it. It really changed how I did assessment, that it wasn't tied to just looking at tests, but talking with people, talking with the kids themselves, describing what was going on.
Right. That was it. Right.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
It's so different, but that has not taken off in our field, right?
No, we keep still pushing it.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I have a consultant. I'm consulting with a private practice in Singapore that's trying to get all of their staff to understand how they do this with assessment. And I don't know that that's happened in the US.
Yeah, and just to tie it to intervention. So years ago, you have ideas for papers, and I had this, I titled my paper Fragmentation. So by writing behavioral goals, we essentially fragment therapy. But, how do you not fragment? And people like Dana Kowarski, Jack D'Amico have written about that. I actually wrote them a few years ago. Is there anything there? Can I write about it? Well, they kind of try to write about it, but it has to do with, you have to start with an assessment like Carol's doing and Jack D'Amico would do and Dana, and then your intervention, I'm sorry, is not going to be behavioral objectives that fragment, and that's how I feel we have not moved beyond this fragmentation of of goals. You know, these
They get
behavioral objectives, if I could change one thing, but you can't, right?
they get forced into it in the school system. I
Yeah.
get so upset because I look at it and I said, this goal is meaningless. And the clinical fellow says, that's what I was told I have to write.
Yeah,
I
they're
said,
told they have to do, right?
yes.
Yep. But
And
even in the clinics, Carol, so, you know, even in our university clinics, that's how they have to do behavioral objectives. And Perry, you know, Perry's good because Perry, you know, is really holistic, but he still, you know, we talk about how do you make them function? Well, you could do, you know, turn taking. That's their favorite. Well, the turn taking is so context specific, right? That you're going to say, well, I want them taking 2 turns. Whoopee, they're taking 2 turns. It still gets fragmented. And I'm sorry, guys, but you know, this is how research, you know, I say should impact, and
yeah,
it just hasn't happened in our field. In the clinics, you know, Jack and those folks tried. I mean, they had a couple of conferences that I went to. You might have gone to.
yeah, well, yes, because there were a number of years we had yearly the group interested in ethnography
Yeah,
met. And so, yeah, Jack and
Judy
Dana
Duchenne.
were all part of that.
Right.
Yes.
So I went to a conference in Buffalo with Judy, and then I did
Yeah,
one in
yes.
Battle Creek
Oh,
with
yes,
them.
Judy, yes. Yeah.
Judy Duchenne was a
Right,
big
right.
one.
Judy was big in that. Yeah. Yes, there was a group of us for several years really promoting and writing on that.
Yeah, but it never took off, Carol. Right?
So
It didn't.
as a follow-up, do you think additional research needs to be done to
Could you give an
prevent the
example of what you
fragmentation
consider appropriate
or
goals?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. Go ahead.
No, there's a chat there. Can you give an example of what would be an appropriate goal?
Oh,
Oh,
okay.
Carol, you want to take that one?
oh, it's always hard off the top of my head.
What's an appropriate goal?
Because I often, you know, when I'm trying to write, you write a goal at the activity level, which is one of the skills of, yeah, you know, being able to produce this particular kind of syntax. But it will be something like in the class discussion on the narrative, will explain the character's feeling using complex sentence that includes this kind of structure. But making it functional, tying it to comprehension, not an isolated question, but as part of the discussion. And that's again where the ICF is important because you are to have an activity goal, which is a skill. The kids do need to know the phonology, the morphology, but then how do they show they use that within a naturalistic context, within a discussion on the reasons the characters are doing what they're doing in the story? How do you explain that in a sentence that links and cause-effect relationships, what's going on? So it's kind of that focus. What's the context? What's the activity? And what kind of language do you need to use in that context?
Okay,
Currently, yeah.
Yeah, and I'll give one. So I've written about it in the paper I did in 2014. So let's say you want to work on complex sentences. Should your goal be child will produce nominal clauses or object clauses? No. Your goal should be I want the kid thinking, wishing, hoping, knowing. Okay, what does that do? I think I want to leave. Okay, there's your object clause. There's your nominal clause. What do you wish for? I wish I was back at the beach. Oh, there's your object clause, nominal clause. So you use semantics. Let's do an adverbial clause. Child, you know, the one that I don't like is child will produce adverbial clauses. No, I want child will talk about because. You know, child will talk about when they're doing something. I went to school when, you know, I had to get up. Where?
Yeah.
So your adverbials are semantic, based on the conjunctive adverb used, not the syntax.
Yeah.
So those are very specific goals that facilitate communication. You could build it into a story context rather than just, you know, sentence exchange, although Cheryl Scott, you know, it has the, you know, Cheryl Scott's wants syntax at the sentence level. Carol and I could have a discussion about that. I think sentence level is important, but I want a discourse level as quickly
She's
as
starting to talk beyond that, though. Yeah, she is. Yeah, I was excited to see that she's starting to go beyond that a bit.
Okay, so I hope
All
we
right,
answered
so
the
any,
question. I mean, we gave
yes,
you a
thank
couple of
you.
examples of goals. I mean, I would, of course, if I'm doing phonology, I want the kid, if you're working on an S sound, I want you writing down the word with the target sound, okay, with the letter, not just, the sound. We're working on Sammy the Snake. I want the kid to see the letters because it's never too early to teach kids letter recognition.
Mhm.
I know this is language, but
It's all connected, right?
Yeah.
Okay, well, any other, if you could make a wish, what wish would you have for more research in the area of child language?
well, I'll start with that since we're switching. So what I wrote down, actually decided to write down stuff, is research that shows that simple solutions for language-based problems like auditory interventions, targeting memory, etc., don't work. Now, I think we don't need the research because I think it's just logical, but and people can interpret research differently. But language is hard to improve. When we talk about comprehension, what's the most important thing about comprehension? Knowledge of the topic, domain-specific knowledge. Well, none of the strategies, are gonna, teach you knowledge about each particular subject. You have to learn about the subject. So language is hard. So if somebody says, well, I could just work on, working memory causes language, I'll just work on improving their working memory. And then it's like, that's my pink pill answer to language. If there's a pink pill, a green pill, whatever pill you want to improve it, take it. But there's not. So recognize that it's not going to happen overnight. Prepare the parents, tell them, but of course the parents are going to be looking for simpler solutions. So they'll go to the audiologist and do, an intervention. We have ILS that the students do in the summer, integrated listening systems, where they put headphones on and listen to music. I mean, is that going to improve their language? No, unless you do speech therapy with it, okay? So we have the SLP work with the audiologist, but then what's improving the kid? Putting the headphones on or getting the appropriate input for language learning? So my thing is, research that shows that simple solutions are not effective.
Carol, how about you?
Well, and as I was thinking about the issue, I've been involved these last couple of years in a lot of international work around narrative. And I get concerned that the idea is we need a protocol and we need everyone to go through the same protocol. And so I was working with one of the Hong Kong people, and we were saying, this is not working. And with the person running we all have to have the same protocol so we know. And we ended up saying, okay, then we do that protocol and show that the kids in Hong Kong aren't going to respond. And then we do the other one where we try to modify it for the culture. Almost all of our data on child language is on English-speaking kids. And in recent years, we're clearly getting better, but I'm concerned there's this big movement now with the large language models being able to analyze the samples, and that's exciting, but the data it's getting is already very biased. How are those models going to be used? We don't have sufficient data on how kids in most of the world learn to talk. And there are clearly differences. Again, I'm involved in what we call the Global Tales Project, and we've got people all over the world looking at children's personal narratives now. And
one thing we don't, like Carol says, maybe have the data for narratives. We do have some of the samples. You got the Carnegie Mellon.
Right.
My son-in-law took over the word bank data from Liz Bates and Phil Dale at Stanford. So the word bank data is phenomenal. You have data on lexical acquisition, across the world. with certain patterns. So we do have,
Yeah, a big piece we don't know is particularly how do parents, caregivers socialize their kids to the talking piece, because there are considerable differences between East and West. And so then the issue is we're finding when you're working with the families, what framework, what model do you use?
Yeah.
And then just, how much even the structure of the language can affect what kids focus on. Well, that was one of the studies we recently published. I had looked at the personal narratives of kids from the US, New Zealand, Australia, from Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Korea. And the Asian kids were similar in a number of ways in what they talked about. And the American kids, or the English-speaking kids, were similar, but there were considerable differences in what they were going to talk about and what was the focus of their stories.
Interesting. Margo, I think you have a question.
I do have a question. All right. I just want to tell both of you, this could go on for 15 hours for me, and I would be so happy just to sit here and listen to the two of you for hour upon hour. So thank you so much. Here's our next question. What is the most significant change that you've seen during your career? It could be a philosophy that changed or a theory that has now been debunked. And I think Dr. Westby, I think you're up.
Well, one that isn't language that Ellen knows. It's like when we started in stuttering, you blamed the parents. It took us a long time to realize, no, this is a neurological condition. So that was a major change. The issue that comes up and that, Ellen, you keep talking about is there's so much we know that hasn't impacted our field in the way it should. Why do I still have to fight for the SLPs in the schools to be talking about reading?
Yeah.
We've known that for so many years. And that's the concern.
Well, and it's actually worse from what I've heard now. So we had it's hard to track it, but from what I hear from Perry and other folks, that you're getting more pushback that the SLPs, if we look at the NUMS data, what's the most frequent client, what's the client they see the most? It's not SSD anymore. It's autism. It's ASD.
Oh, yes, you're right.
So,
You're
it's
right.
kids that have, and then to work on reading. So my answer to the question was recognition that children with spoken language problems also have written language problems. That's a major, I said that at the beginning. It's one of the major things. Had we increased the scope of practice? Well,
Right.
You recognize it doesn't go away, but are we working on it? SLPs, the good thing about our field is they are autonomous. They could hear, me blab on, Perry blab on, Carol blab on at workshops, and then do whatever the hell they want, when they get back to their schools. Because they are autonomous. Perry is the lead SLP in North Carolina. He can't force an SLP to work on reading or discourse or narrative or whatever we want them to work on. Figurative language, for example, is a big deal once you get middle school. One of my favorite teaching experiences, I did a continuing ed class when I was up in the Chicago area, and I had middle school teachers, and it was just great. I had a psychologist there, and just working on figurative language when you have a middle school kid, not just syntax and morphology. These kids have to socialize, and they have to. And it's not just the simple exercise, what's an idiom, it's raining cats and dogs. That is so difficult to teach kids sarcasm, language. I have a book that I bought last week about the new slang, the internet slang that kids are picking up. One day in class in language development, I always ask them what's the latest slang. So again, it's okay. I think we're losing the thread here. But the point that Carol made is we know what to do, what should be done, but is it done? You
Yeah.
know, from the discussion of the behavioral objectives to working on reading, to working on, you know, narrative discourse, conversational discourse. Just one more thing. One of my favorite studies, and I have a lot of favorite studies. So we could talk about discourse, Bonnie Brenton and Marty Fujika. Unfortunately, Marty passed away. We're getting too old, Carol. But one of my favorite studies they did was their case study of access behavior. If you remember that one, where they had a 16-year-old kid, and I followed the kid, and how do you enter a group? Okay, so do you do the Seinfeld Kramer? You just slide into the room and here I am. Well, there's a art. You have to like slide in, listen to a part of the conversation. I mean, that's such an important social skill.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen it as an objective for an adolescent or a high school kid? Access behavior, I would argue, despite the fact that that study's 30 years old and so important for kids.
So true. It is an art.
It is an art, right? I mean, some adults are bad at it, right? It's
right.
Like they just stand there and they expect you to, excuse me, why are you standing there? Right? It's an art.
And I would argue exit a conversation as well.
Yeah, no, without a doubt. Yeah. Yeah. I had a colleague in Memphis. We would use T for topic change. So one of us might not be finished talking about a topic, but the other was finished listening. And we would just do topic change, and one would start another topic and let the other one finish. Now, if you do that with your spouse, it doesn't work at all, right? Or partner, whatever the word is.
Topic we haven't addressed that's really part of this is the whole digital literacy. I'm on the Child Language Committee for the International Association of
Yes, we just have somebody who does those goals. Thank you, Win 10 Pro.
So we just completed a survey of 1,000 SLPs around the world about what they know about digital literacy, and surprisingly, not much at all, and really, misunderstandings. And the main thing, they use the computer to have therapy materials, but hardly anyone thought about what do you need to do so that the student can really comprehend and produce digital literacy, because it takes everything you need for print literacy plus a lot more. So what are the skills? And Barbara Aaron talks a lot about this, as well as Marilyn Nipple, the ability they have to recognize false information. They have to recognize fallacies. And I realize a lot of adults in our world are not digitally literate. They can't recognize the fallacies themselves. And how do you teach that? That's a whole other area of teaching. It's its own, involves some of its own unique language, which is one of the things. You have to have the language for the print, but you also have to know the structure of the visual, the structure, the layout of the pages in order to interpret what's there. So.
Good point. So an area for further research.
Yes, definitely.
Margo, did you want to add anything?
No, I'm just looking at our time, Mary Beth, and wondering where you would like to go next. So I'm going to let you kind of take the lead of where you'd like to go next.
Okay, so we do have some questions from our participants. If people are able to stay on for a few minutes after the hour, we can take those questions then. Let's jump into, I don't think we have time to discuss case studies. Let us talk about advice. You are such legends in our field and so accomplished. What advice would you give to new clinicians? And I'll let you all decide who would like to go first.
I'll just start. A couple of my doc students, when I did the class on DLD, they were both clinicians that worked 10 to 12 years in schools and went to excellent programs, and SLI was the term. But once I covered DLD and they read the papers on it's just not being identified, about the awareness. They decided that's going to be there, and that they've been doing dog and pony shows at various state conferences. They're going to Mississippi. They've been to Pennsylvania. They've, of course, done North Carolina. One of the students from Chicago. The last 2 years, they did H-ASHA. And SLPs just, don't diagnose language disorder. The talk today is language disorder, but the label is DLD. We haven't used the term DLD. So I want clinicians to use the term DLD to make parents aware that their kids have a developmental language disorder. There's enough literature now. It might be comorbid with dyslexia and learning disabilities. It might be comorbid with ASD, but it's not being diagnosed. So the advice I want is, this is a webinar on language disorders. Diagnose them. Don't put kids in the ASD, the ADHD, all the other categories. Put them in North Carolina, it's SLI, speech language impaired, but start using the DLD term. Make parents aware that DLD, and there's enough literature now on it that so that would be my hope, that this is a webinar on language disorder. Identify them. Don't call them something else.
Thank you. And Dr. Westby?
Yeah, you're talking about that. In New Mexico, the SLP is not allowed to diagnose DLD. Only the diagnostician can do that. And so part of you were saying, what do I want to tell people? Please get involved with your association. One thing, find a mentor. I mean, Ellen, Kate Butler, people like Kate Butler, Joel Stark were so important to us. And being able to know that you could go, and when people are telling you you're crazy, there's someone that you can go to and say, no, you're doing the right thing. Keep doing this. Find people of like mind who can support you, and find people. I've had people now throughout my career who have been my mentors that have been so important. So that's the major thing. And get involved in your associations. The fact that in New Mexico, an SLP cannot give a diagnosis. So then I have to tell my staff, okay, you need to help your diagnostician understand what the issue is and how to do that. And you've got to get her to sign off on this. This is crazy making, because, well, even in our largest district, no SLP in the school is allowed to do their own assessments. The children are sent to a central place where they are given standardized tests. That group of people write the IEP that is sent back to the school. And I have to figure out how to help the CFs, because whatever I tell them to do has to still kind of does have to address the goal that was written, but the goals are so bad. How do we help you write a reasonable goal? And I'll have people calling them saying, that wasn't your lesson didn't match our goal. We have to somehow get SLPs to have more power within where they're working. That's a big issue that stops. You train them, Ellen, and then they go into environments where they're put down if they try to do what they've been told is best.
So as you're talking, I'm thinking, so we had a chat saying, DLD is not covered by insurance. So one of my other papers that never got written, I call it the obstacle paper. Every time somebody suggests something, Carol and I have suggested a number of things. It's easy to come up with obstacles. Carol just gave you a bunch in the state of New Mexico. But if you believe in language disorder, that it is a separate category, okay? Yes, you'll have to figure out a way to get that kid covered by insurance. You might not use the DLD term. You use whatever term you have to do to get the kid's insurance. But when you talk to the parent, okay, or somebody, use the DLD term. Use it with a colleague. Get awareness that language disorder is a real entity, just like ASD. Everybody wants to be ASD or ADHD or APD. How about want to be DLD? Well, the reason you don't is because, like I said earlier, it's difficult to treat. So parents and people are going to look for easier solutions. and it's in a sense better to have a diagnosis that people know about. So I'm
Yeah.
pessimistic about DLD doing any better than SLI in terms of awareness, but at least we have people trying, okay, to make DLD. I think it's a much better term than SLI. SLI wasn't specific, okay? So.
Well, thank you. And as Margo said, we could talk about this for 15 hours. So we're going to, if it's okay with you all, we're going to stay on for about 5 more minutes after we close. So anyone who needs to go can go. And again, there's just a reminder that this episode is available for 0.1 ASHA CEUs. And to earn the ASHA CEUs, please complete all course modules on your Speech Therapy PD account. And of course, we would love to hear from you, so you can subscribe and leave a comment in your review. So now let's go back. First of all, is there anything, before we go through the questions that some of the participants have written, is there anything else, Dr. Westby and Dr. Kamhi, that you would like to add?
Well, in answer to question 8, what's your hope for the future of the profession? Use AI, guys. Okay, I use it in my classes. You know, I used it right away when only one student ever heard a chat. They do discussion blogs. I say, if you use it, have it answer the question, then comment on it, ask another question, comment on it. It will help assessment. It will do narrative. Use it. Don't be afraid of AI. And don't let other professionals, you know, figure out how to use it to improve assessment and diagnosis. Use it. So that's my, you know, your hope for the embrace it. Okay.
Thank you. And Dr. Westby, anything you would like to add, or your hope for the future clinicians, or hope for the profession?
I guess part of what Ellen and I've talked, if we could get more of the things we already know implemented.
Yes.
That's
Yeah, but Carol, you and I are old. We kind of know it's not happening. Great.
So maybe
there
are some,
you know, goal writing. Yes.
Some people that will follow us that. So, you know, I was saying that the SLPs need to find mentors. We need to find mentees that we can really promote and lead them through the field to make certain that they're carrying on what we want to have happen.
That's the reason I keep teaching, Carol. People ask me, I want to retire. No, I love it.
No.
Well, thank you. Okay, so now we can go through some of these questions. Margo, how about if we just do every other one? I'll start with the one, this one. What do you think about the writing revolution to discuss and write for more sentence complexity in context?
I'll let Carol do that one. Channel your Nikki Nelson, whatever.
Oh, no. You know, all I can say is that, yeah, and it makes perfect sense. Having kids write about meaningful experiences, and it's certainly, you know, with Nikki's writing lab, that it's naturalistic writing. Yeah, and that's, you know, I don't know if people were thinking it's not a good idea, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you know, we've you know had a couple of comments that people are using AI. I would use AI to, if you know, high school kids have to write something, see what AI does, and then have them.
There was a recent study, Alan, it just came out maybe about 3 weeks ago. It got a lot of play because I think they took college students and they had to write an essay, and some of them had to first write the essay and then use AI, and others got to use AI first. The ones that wrote the essay first and then used AI, because then they checked them several weeks later, much better remembered and showed that they understood. The students that started with AI didn't remember as much of the information. That was getting back, they didn't learn it.
Yeah. So my psych, I think that's the study that methodologically was not good. That's the one that got, you know, the times and everything.
Yeah.
So somebody just asked a question there that I just forgot. Put that chat up. The one
Okay, we think we have it up. Margo, do you want to ask the next question? The one
No,
at
what was the one that
349?
just, I was going to comment on one that,
Oh, go down? Okay.
yeah. Somebody just said something and Carol just got me off it.
Sorry, Dr. Kamhi, what were you, which one are we
It was a
looking for?
chat. It was a chat that I was going to comment on. That was just
Oh.
there when Carol was talking.
Something that someone said.
Yeah.
Mm.
Where is it?
Do you,
The other one, I would love to see an article written about what we know, what works and not being implemented. Check out the 2014 LSHSS Clinical Forum. That's what I did
Yes.
in that article. So what
Yeah.
I did, it's like, okay, I'm tired of everybody saying that there's not enough research. Let's look at what we know. And I went through what we know in that 2014 article. And there were a number of people that also wrote articles. So Sunita Eisenberg did stuff on the science of learning that I covered in the article. She has one, I think Cheryl Scott. But that clinical forum addresses, it's 2014. Just look up my name, 2014 LSHSS. There's a clinical forum on language therapy.
So Dr. Westby, I think this will be a question that goes to you. The question is, do you have an opinion on the book from Bilinguistics, Language Differences versus Disorders?
No, I haven't. I haven't looked at that book in a long time.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I like it in regard to it's very basic, but Dr. Susan Kester, I believe, Dr. Kester.
Yes.
She looked at 15 different languages and kind of looked at, I love the Venn diagrams that show even the phonemes that are similar and different.
Yeah.
I think she put like morphology and syntax together, but then a little bit of pragmatics as well. There's another book that I love by Celeste Roseberry McKibbin.
Yes,
Multicultural, different. It's a long title.
Yeah. That one's
well.
gone through several editions.
Yeah. So that's a good one too. But yeah, the one with bilinguistics, it gives some basic information.
But yeah, I think it's good in term, particularly when you're looking at the phonology and you don't know the language, gives you a sense of what you might be seeing as influence of the first language or a speech problem.
Yeah.
And it's presented nicely.
Yeah, it is. Well, I'm so sorry that we're out of time. We could have spoken for, as you said, 15 hours or at least another hour. You have so many of our participants have great questions that have not been answered. Would it be possible to share a way that our participants could get a hold of you? Is there an email address?
Sure. Yeah. Just once you give them my email, you have it.
Yeah.
Okay.
See, mine's easy to remember because it's Mocha, which was the duck.
Yeah. And you could do, agkamhi@gmail.com.
Okay. Actually, we'll have those. We'll have Yumi put both of those with the show notes. Okay. All right.
How many people actually attended? Could you tell us that? Do you know?
We have 55 participants still on. Margo, did you look before?
We were at 77.
Okay.
So, and the best thing is it's being recorded. So I know that there will be so many more participants that will gain so much knowledge from the two of you. So special thank you again for allowing me to be here with you today because this was really special. So thank you.
Well, thanks. It was fun getting to see my old friend, Carol.
Yeah. As I said, I was delighted when they said, "Oh, we'll put you on with Alan." And I said,
"Oh," and I was like, "Oh, Carol, I get to see Carol."
Yeah, it's been a long time.
Yeah. Well, thank you again for participating. We were very intentional with finding our legends for this series, and we appreciate you being with us today and all of your contributions to the field. It doesn't go unnoticed that you have really contributed so much and become legends in our field. So thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having us.
Yeah, thanks.
Appreciate it.
All right, and I'm just going to give everyone that reminder again that this episode is available for 0.1 ASHA CEUs, and to earn those CEUs, please complete all course modules of this episode on your SpeechTherapyPD account. If you are seeking live CEUs, please do that before the end of the day today. So thank you so much. Take care, everyone.